as Chief Audit Officer, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, taken directly from the definition of internal auditing, what the internal audit function does, it adds value to the operations, the company's operations, right? How it adds value through adopting a systematic and disciplined approach to the process of risk management, control, and governance. And when we say risk management, it's all about identifying the risk that impacts the organization in terms of achieving their objectives. And when we speak about governance, we speak about the policies and the procedures that informs, direct, and manage the activities of the organization. In the fintech sphere, where we are getting into, right, we have coined a trilogy in terms of enabling that fintech space. And we refer to it, the three items are education, innovation, and regulation. My colleagues would have spoken on the education and innovation part. Regulation is where the internal audit function comes in, right? And the internal audit function basically has to assess the controls in place for managing the risk associated in the fintech world, money laundering and financing of terrorism, right? That is one of the key areas, and the regulators in Trinidad and internationally, what they look at towards the internal audit function is to play that critical role in reviewing and assessing the effectiveness of the risk management system in place for identifying and managing the risk associated with money laundering and financing of terrorism. So that's a nutshell. Yeah.
This is what I always find fascinating about fintech. If you're, whether it be from a risk perspective, a technology perspective, if you are working correctly 99.99% of the time, not good enough. That is such an emotive thing, dealing with people's money.
Yes.
Against that backdrop, what exactly and how big are the risks that we're playing with here when it does come to things like anti-money laundering, AML, and to be able to show that to the banks? What are some of what's at stake here?
So the risks are big, huge. What's the reason why the regulatory bodies, like in our case, we have the central bank that monitor, and what they have done, because the risks are so huge, because money laundering is about the criminal elements seeking to legitimize illegitimate sources of funds, and what better way to do it than in the fintech space, all right? And thus the reason why you have the regulatory bodies requiring companies engaged in fintech to adopt a risk-based approach. And what they require companies to do, and this is an international requirement, is to adopt what is called a 3 lines of defense model. And what the 3 lines of defense model basically speaks about is the company needs to have in place, one, we have the business unit managers. They are the front line. Those are the customer-facing persons. They are the ones who are responsible for ensuring that the risk and the mitigating actions to prevent or mitigate the risk associated with money laundering and financing of terrorism are being done. And we speak about things like monitoring suspicious transactions, things like, as you would know, KYC, know your customer. Then what we have is the second line of defense, which is referred to as the compliance function. And having a compliance officer employed in your company is not an option, it's a requirement, right? And the role of the compliance officer as the second line of defense is to monitor, to ensure that the company and the persons who are required to practice the activities, the requirements, are in fact doing it. That's the compliance officer. They have to do the monitoring to ensure that the company is performing according to what is documented. And then what we have is myself, the third line of defense, which is the internal audit function. And the internal audit function basically monitors the first and the second line of defense. Also, to independently assess and to evaluate the existing what we call AML CFT program, risk management program, right? And the AML, which is anti-money laundering, and CFT, counter financing of terrorism, is to ensure that that structure that is in place is in fact efficient and effective enough to mitigate the risk associated with it, because the risks are huge. And the consequences, I might dare say, is that you could get blacklisted as a company, and the officers as well, to deter and to kind of push companies to adhere to and conform to the models, the best practice models, is that huge fines that comes with imprisonment for a number of years. So the regulatory bodies demonstrate that, hey, this is a serious thing, right? If it is your plan on getting into this fintech space, you need to, as we would say, local parlance, dot your I and cross your T's.
Do you think there's almost an uphill battle when it comes to regulation by sheer virtue of the fact that you're in the Caribbean?
Some may say yes, but what I think is that there's a reason for it. All right, but a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, it hinders, right? So getting back to the trilogy that I spoke about, the education, the innovation, and the regulation. Regulation could stifle innovation. You have the innovation and the education, but that regulation could stifle it. But because the risk is so high, there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance to adhering to policies and procedures that would prevent the risk from materializing, and promoting innovation in this sphere. Because if you go too tight on the regulation, you'll stifle the innovation. And we wouldn't be sitting here discussing and having this forum on fintech. Yeah, it is an uphill battle with regards to the regulatory bodies, but I think once you're in it, and once it is your practice, the good things, where it comes to governance, it will be like a second nature. All right, so it's all about lining up your ducks, right, and practicing it. And also, very important, how you enshrine that culture and core values within your entity. And I could tell you that in Unipet, we have enshrined that very deeply in our DNA and in our core. That's the reason why it's a seamless transition for us to get into this space. All right? So we don't see the uphill battle as an uphill battle, actually.